A New York City bus, 1958. Malcolm X boards carrying a hardcover book. The only available seat is next to a white woman in her 50s. Malcolm walks down the aisle. The woman watches him approach. When she realizes he's going to sit next to her, she immediately clutches her purse with both hands, presses it against her body, leans toward the window trying to create maximum distance. Malcolm sits, opens his book, starts reading, says nothing about her obvious fear. 20 minutes pass in tense silence. Then the woman glances at what he's reading. Her reaction reveals everything she just learned about her own prejudice. But before we discover what book Malcolm was reading and how this woman's assumptions got challenged, if you appreciate stories about everyday moments when prejudice gets exposed, when simple acts reveal deep biases, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button if you believe people deserve to be judged by who they are, not by assumptions based on appearance. These small moments matter because they show how racism operates in daily life, in buses and stores and streets. Now let's find out exactly what happened on that bus ride. The bus is the M7 line running up Amsterdam Avenue through Manhattan. It's 6:15 in the evening, Tuesday. The bus is crowded with people heading home from work, office workers in suits, shop clerks in uniforms, students with backpacks, domestic workers tired from cleaning houses all day, the typical evening rush hour mix. 30 people standing in the aisle holding overhead straps, every seat filled except one. Malcolm X boards at 125th Street in Harlem. He's 32 years old, been out of prison for 7 years, rising through the Nation of Islam ranks, speaking at universities and on street corners, building temples across the country. Today he spent the afternoon at Columbia University Library doing research, reading political philosophy, taking notes for an upcoming speech. The library closes at 6, now he's heading back to Harlem. He's wearing his standard appearance, dark suit well-fitted but not expensive, white shirt pressed, thin black tie, wire-rimmed glasses. His posture is perfect, spine straight, shoulders back. He carries a worn leather satchel over one shoulder containing his notebooks and the book he checked out from the library. A hardcover volume, thick, clearly well-read. He pays his fare, 15 cents dropped into the coin box. The driver barely glances at him. Malcolm walks down the aisle looking for a seat. The bus is full, people standing, every seat occupied. Then he spots one empty seat halfway back, next to the window. A white woman sits in the aisle seat. She's left the window seat empty, probably hoping to keep it that way, to have space, to avoid sitting next to strangers in the crowded bus. The woman is in her mid-50s, well-dressed. Navy blue coat with a fur collar, matching hat, leather gloves, pearl earrings. She's reading a magazine, Ladies' Home Journal. The cover shows a smiling white family in a suburban kitchen, the American dream captured in glossy photographs. Malcolm approaches. The woman senses movement, looks up from her magazine, sees Malcolm walking toward her, sees him stop at her row, realizes with sudden panic that he's going to sit next to her, the only empty seat on the bus. Her reaction is immediate and instinctive. Fear flashes across her face. Her hands move quickly. She grabs her leather purse from beside her on the seat. It's a good purse. Expensive. She clutches it with both hands against her chest. Her arms wrap around it protectively. Her body shifts, leans away from the aisle seat toward the window, creating maximum distance. She presses against the window as far as the seat allows. Malcolm sees all of this, registers every micro movement, every signal. He's seen this reaction hundreds of times. In elevators, in stores, on sidewalks. White women clutching their purses, white people crossing streets. The assumption that black men are dangerous, are criminals, are threats to be feared and avoided. He could confront it, could ask her why she's clutching her purse, could point out the obvious racism, could make her uncomfortable in return. But he doesn't. Not because he accepts it, not because it doesn't hurt, but because confronting every instance of casual racism would consume his entire life. He'd never do anything else, would never reach his destination, would exhaust himself fighting battles that won't change minds. So he sits calmly, without comment, without acknowledgement of her fear. He settles into the window seat. The woman remains rigid in the aisle seat. her purse still clutched tight, her body still leaning away. Her discomfort is palpable. She doesn't want to be here, doesn't want to sit next to him. But the bus is moving. Getting off and waiting for the next bus would mean another 20 minutes. So she stays. Trapped in her own fear and prejudice, Malcolm pulls the book from his satchel, sets the satchel on the floor between his feet, opens the book to where a bookmark indicates his place, settles in to read. The book is large, hardcover, well-worn. The pages are marked with small strips of paper, notes in margins. This is clearly a book that's been studied, not just read casually. The woman stares straight ahead, doesn't look at Malcolm, doesn't look at his book, just stares at the back of the seat in front of her. Her magazine sits closed in her lap. She's too tense to read, too aware of Malcolm's presence. Every small movement he makes, she notices when he shifts his weight. When he turns a page, she's hyper-aware and uncomfortable. Malcolm reads, actually reads. Not pretending, not making a statement, just genuinely engaging with the text in front of him. He's comfortable. The woman's discomfort doesn't affect him. He's learned to exist in spaces where he's not wanted, to maintain his dignity and purpose despite others' prejudice. It's a skill developed over decades, a necessary survival mechanism. The bus continues uptown, stops at 135th Street. Several people get off, several get on. The aisle is still crowded. The woman considers moving to a different seat, but there are none available. She's stuck. She pulls out her magazine, tries to read, but she can't focus, can't stop being aware of Malcolm next to her, can't relax. Malcolm turns pages steadily. His reading pace is consistent. He's not skimming. He's reading carefully, stopping occasionally to reread a passage, to think through an argument. Sometimes he pulls a small notebook from his jacket pocket, writes a brief note, returns the notebook, continues reading. At 145th Street, more people get off. The bus is less crowded now. Several empty seats. The woman could move, but moving now would be obvious, would reveal her discomfort, would be an admission of her fear. She doesn't want to be that obvious. Doesn't want Malcolm to know she's afraid, even though her body language already screamed it the moment he sat down. 15 minutes have passed since Malcolm sat down. The initial tension is subsiding slightly. The woman is still uncomfortable but no longer in panic mode. Nothing bad happened. Malcolm didn't grab her purse, didn't speak to her, didn't do anything except sit and read. The catastrophe she feared didn't materialize. Her breathing slows. Her grip on her purse loosens slightly. She opens her magazine again, tries to read an article about decorating tips for spring, but she keeps glancing at Malcolm peripherally, not directly, just sideways glances. Taking in details she was too panicked to notice initially. He's well dressed, clean. His suit is pressed. His shirt is crisp. His shoes are polished. He doesn't look dangerous, doesn't look threatening. He looks like a businessman or a professor, someone respectable. This conflicts with her initial reaction, with her automatic fear. She starts to feel a small prickle of embarrassment. 20 minutes into the ride, curiosity overcomes her discomfort. She wants to know what he's reading. What book requires such focused attention? What text deserves those careful notes? She glances sideways more deliberately, tries to see the cover. The book is open in his lap. She can't see the title from this angle. She shifts slightly, adjusts her position as if getting more comfortable, uses the movement to glance down at the book in Malcolm's hands, sees the pages. Dense text, small print, clearly an academic or literary work, not a magazine, not light reading. Something substantial. Then she sees the top of the page, the header, the author's name in small print. William Shakespeare. Her eyes widen slightly. She shifts again, trying to see more, trying to confirm what she just saw. Is he really reading Shakespeare? Malcolm turns the page. The header on the new page confirms it. The complete works of William Shakespeare. The page he's reading is from Hamlet. Act 3. The famous soliloquy, to be or not to be, the most analyzed passage in English literature. And this black man she was terrified of sitting next to is reading it with complete focus and comprehension. The woman's face changes, color rises in her cheeks. a deep, uncomfortable flush spreading from her neck upward, the physical manifestation of shame. She just realized what she did. She clutched her purse in fear of a man reading Shakespeare. She assumed criminality while sitting next to someone engaged in serious literary study. She treated an educated person like a threat based solely on the color of his skin. Her hands loosen on her purse. It slides down to her lap. She looks away from Malcolm quickly, stares out the window. But now she's not tense from fear. She's tense from embarrassment, from the realization of her own prejudice, from understanding that her assumptions were completely wrong. Malcolm continues reading. Doesn't acknowledge her reaction, doesn't look at her, doesn't give any sign that he noticed her glancing at his book or her subsequent embarrassment. He just reads, turns pages, takes occasional notes, completely absorbed in Hamlet's existential crisis. The woman sits with her discomfort, can't escape it, can't undo her initial reaction, can't take back the fear and prejudice she displayed so obviously. She thinks about how she must have looked to him. A white woman clutching her purse in terror of a man doing nothing more threatening than sitting and reading. The image shames her deeply. She remembers her own education. She went to college, studied literature, read Shakespeare in her sophomore year, struggled with it, found the language difficult, the themes complex. She passed the class but never really understood what made Shakespeare great, never engaged with it the way this man beside her is engaging with it now. Never read it again after college. It sat on her bookshelf unread for 30 years. And here's this black man, someone she assumed was uneducated based on nothing but his skin color, reading the same text she struggled with, reading it with obvious comprehension, taking notes, really studying it. The contrast is devastating. Her assumptions were not just wrong, they were backwards. She wants to apologize, wants to say something, to acknowledge her mistake. But what would she say? Sorry, I assumed you were a criminal. Sorry, I treated you like a threat. The words seem inadequate, seem like they would make things worse, would force him to acknowledge her prejudice, to deal with her guilt, to absolve her. That's not his job. He's not responsible for making her feel better about her racism, so she says nothing, just sits with the shame and the lesson she's learning. Sometimes silence is the only appropriate response to your own mistakes. At 155th Street, more people get off. The bus is half empty now. Many available seats. The woman could move easily now. No one would notice or care. But she doesn't move. Moving now would be cowardly, would be running from the discomfort she created. So she stays, sits next to Malcolm for the remainder of the ride, a small act of penance. Malcolm continues reading for another 10 minutes, then marks his place with the bookmark, closes the book, sets it carefully in his satchel, pulls the cord to signal his stop, stands up, picks up his satchel, walks to the door without glancing at the woman. The bus stops at 168th Street. The doors open. Malcolm steps off. The doors close. The bus continues. The woman watches him through the window, watches him walk down the street, back straight, dignified, carrying his satchel with his Shakespeare. She sits with her shame for the next 3 stops until she reaches her destination. That evening, she tells her husband about the incident, describes her fear, describes clutching her purse, describes discovering he was reading Shakespeare, describes the shame that followed. Her husband listens while reading the newspaper, asks why she's so upset about it, tells her she was just being careful. She struggles to articulate what bothers her so much, struggles to explain that being careful and being prejudiced are 2 different things, that her fear wasn't based on anything Malcolm did, wasn't based on his behavior or actions, was based solely on his appearance, on the color of his skin. That's not being careful, that's being racist. Her husband doesn't understand, tells her she's overthinking it, that everyone is more cautious around strangers, that it's natural, that she shouldn't feel bad about protecting her belongings. He says she reads too many magazines about social issues, gets too worked up about things that don't matter. His response makes her feel worse, because she realizes he doesn't see the problem, doesn't understand what she learned, doesn't recognize the prejudice inherent in her fear. She tries harder to explain, tries to describe how wrong it feels to have treated an educated person like a criminal, to have feared someone based on nothing. He brushes it off, changes the subject, asks what's for dinner. They eat dinner, watch television. The conversation is over, but the woman can't forget, can't stop thinking about Malcolm reading Shakespeare while she clutched her purse in fear. The image stays with her, haunts her, makes her question other assumptions she makes. Other times, she's been afraid of black men for no reason except their presence. Over the following weeks, she starts noticing her reactions more consciously. Notices when she clutches her purse in elevators, when she crosses streets to avoid black men, when she makes assumptions about who's dangerous and who's not. The bus incident made her aware of patterns she never questioned before. She starts making different choices. Small ones. When she's in an elevator with a black man, she keeps her purse where it is, doesn't clutch it, doesn't signal fear. When someone sits next to her on the bus, she doesn't assume threat, just sits normally. These are tiny acts, but they require conscious effort, require overriding instincts shaped by years of socialized racism. She'll never see Malcolm again. Doesn't know his name, doesn't know who he was, just remembers him as the man reading Shakespeare, the man who taught her a lesson without saying a word, the man whose dignity, in the face of her fear, made her examine her own prejudice. Malcolm never thinks about this incident again. For him, it was just another bus ride, another instance of casual racism, another white woman clutching her purse. He's experienced thousands of similar moments. They blur together. This one wasn't notable, wasn't special, just another day existing while black in America. But for the woman, this moment becomes a turning point, not a complete transformation. She doesn't become an anti-racism activist, doesn't dedicate her life to fighting prejudice, but she becomes more aware, more conscious of her assumptions, more willing to question her instinctive reactions. And she tells the story, tells friends about the time she clutched her purse next to a man reading Shakespeare, uses it as an example of how wrong assumptions can be. Years later, after Malcolm X becomes famous, after his face is on television and in newspapers, she sees him, recognizes him immediately. The same face, the same glasses, the man from the bus. She realizes she sat next to Malcolm X, that her fear and prejudice were directed at someone who would become one of the most important figures in American history, someone whose words and ideas would challenge an entire nation. She tells the story differently now, tells it with greater shame, because now he's not just a man reading Shakespeare, he's Malcolm X. And she clutched her purse in fear of Malcolm X because he was black. The absurdity becomes even clearer, the prejudice even more obvious. She saves newspaper clippings about him, reads his speeches, tries to understand the man she was afraid of for no reason, tries to understand what she didn't see that day on the bus, his intelligence, his dignity, his humanity, all invisible to her because of the color of his skin. The story becomes part of her family history. She tells her children, her grandchildren, uses it as a teaching moment, a lesson about assumptions, about prejudice, about how fear can make you blind to humanity. Some of them understand, some don't, but she keeps telling it, keeps using that 20-minute bus ride as evidence of how racism operates, how it functions in small moments, how it affects real people. Malcolm never knew about any of this, never knew he taught someone a lesson that day, never knew his simple act of reading Shakespeare challenged someone's worldview. He just read his book, got off at his stop, went about his day. The impact was invisible to him, as it often is. This is how change happens sometimes, not through grand gestures or famous speeches, but through small moments, through dignity maintained in the face of prejudice, through the simple act of being fully human while others assume you're less than human, through reading Shakespeare on a bus while someone clutches their purse in fear. If this story made you think about your own assumptions, about moments when you've judged people based on appearance, about how prejudice operates in small daily interactions, then subscribe. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be seen as a full human being, not as a stereotype. Consider who you feared without reason. Consider what assumptions you carry. Consider what you might be missing because prejudice blinds you to humanity.